Good afternoon, and welcome to the 1.5-minute climate lectures, part of Climate Week at Penn. This event is co-hosted by Penn Arts and Sciences and the Environmental Innovations Initiative. I'm Simon Richter, the class of 1965 Endowed Term Professor of German and a member of the Climate Week organizing team. Paul Snigovsky, formerly Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I began the 1.5-minute climate lectures in 2019 to bring together professors and leaders from across the university to sound the alarm about the climate emergency and call for action. In the meantime, counting those you'll hear today, there have been 55 faculty climate lectures ranging across the disciplines. The Climate Week theme this year is hotspots. What immediately came to mind as an example was a place that was Greenland, a place that has not only been inordinately hotter than usual, putting some 7 meters of stored sea level rise into play, but also controversial because of geopolitical designs on its strategic location and its resources. There are thus literal and metaphorical hotspots. Hotspots can be alarming and exhilarating. In the case of the latter, if they are zones of focused, well-funded research and innovation on their way to a breakthrough. The colleagues you see here to my right and left, as well as our special guest, will call your attention to some of these hotspots. With these lectures, we underscore Penn's resolve to confront all aspects of climate change. These talks are 1.5 minutes long because the maximum amount the global mean temperature can rise to avoid the worst consequences of global warming is 1.5 degrees Celsius. When we started 7 years ago, we were at 1 degree Celsius. By some measures, 2024 was the first year that we averaged 1.5 degrees. We'll know within the next few years if we've definitively crossed the line. Every 1/10 of a degree is worth fighting for. While social media, news cycles, politicians, and the general flow of conversation seem to have decided that they've had enough of climate change and want to move on, climate change continues. And hotspots like wildfires proliferate and only get hotter. Let these examples serve as a backdrop for the lectures you're about to hear. A 2024 study showed that Greenland lost 20% more ice than previously thought. A few days ago, a group of 160 scientists claimed that we've crossed the tipping point for irrevocable loss of most of the world's coral reefs. At Penn and elsewhere, scientists are racing to generate climate-resilient coral for reef restoration. The tipping point for AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, could be much closer than we thought. Its collapse would cause climate upheaval throughout the Atlantic. From April to July 2025, parts of India and Pakistan sweltered in off-the-charts heat waves with temperatures ranging from 100 to 120 degrees Fahrenheit. There were hundreds of fatalities. In central Texas, the Guadalupe River surged by 8 meters in 45 minutes, causing 135 deaths. In China, more wind and solar power were installed last year than in the rest of the world combined. The same is true for EV and battery manufacturing in China and in Chinese factories around the world. Meanwhile, the US has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement, but Penn, let it be noted, remains an engaged partner. And the Trump administration is canceling renewables, gutting climate agencies, pushing aside climate justice, supercharging fossil fuel extraction, and paving the way for levels of air and water pollution last seen in the early 1970s. This and more is what we're up against. And now, the speakers from whom you'll hear will offer examples of how Penn and others, thinking again of our special guest, devote themselves to addressing these challenges. There will be a question and answer session after the talks. Before I introduce our speakers, I ask you to please tag at Penn SAS, so Penn SAS, and use the hashtag 1.5, which you can see there, 1.5 on any social media posts. In our first lecture, Guy Grossman, the David M. Knott Professor of Global Politics, will make the argument that migration is a sensible form of climate adaptation. Guy is the founder and co-director of Penn's Development Research Initiative and the academic lead of Innovation for Poverty Action's Human Trafficking Research Initiative. An applied political economist, Guy's research focuses on migration and forced displacement, human trafficking, and climate change politics, mostly in the context of developing countries. Please welcome Guy.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for coming. So when we talk about climate change, we often picture distant events like melting ice caps or rising sea levels. But for millions of people in low and middle income countries, the effects are much closer to home, shaping how individuals live, work, and feed their families. Take farmers, for example. Many can no longer grow what their parents did. Rains come too early or too late, or not at all. Salt water seeps into the soil and fertile land becomes increasingly scarce. Agriculture, the backbone of those communities, is under immense stress. Adaptation means finding ways to address this new reality. In wealthy countries, the focus is often on cutting emissions, but in poorer countries, the pressing challenge is learning how to cope with the damage that is already here and is getting worse. One of the most powerful ways to adapt is through migration. When a family member moves to a city or abroad, they often send money home. Now, in most developing countries today, those remittances exceed aid and foreign direct investment. Migration can absolutely transform a family's prospect. But climate change also creates a cruel reality. As farms fail and income drops, the desire to migrate grows, but the ability to migrate shrinks. And when families are trapped, desperation can lead to what we call bad adaptation, taking on predatory loans that lock people into years of work to repay debt that never shrinks. Others might pull their kids from work and from school into work, or marry their daughters off at a young age to ease financial pressure. And that's why governments and the international community have such an important role to play. They can make good adaptation possible. They can expand access to credit to finance migration, legalize regional migration, and protect people on the move from exploitation. Now, of course, not everyone wants to leave home. For those, we can invest in agriculture research to develop drought and flood-resistant seeds, and we can strengthen early warning systems. Because in the end, how we adapt to climate change will shape not only our economies, but also of shared humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. Next, Lee Stearns, a new professor in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science, will talk about navigating the Arctic, why we urgently need coordinated satellite data and AI. Lee studies how glaciers and ice sheets change in a warming climate using geophysics, satellite imagery, and machine learning. Since starting graduate school, she estimates that she has spent over 30 months, not continuously, doing field work in Antarctica, Greenland, and Alaska. Her recent work uses satellite imagery and AI tools to quantify glacier and iceberg changes around Greenland. She's passionate about working across disciplines to fill scientific gaps, build resilience, and reduce emissions. Please welcome Lee.
Politics aside, it's actually a really exciting time to be a climate scientist. For the first time ever, we have the awareness, the technology, and the data to make substantial progress. But the needs are great, and solutions need to be grounded in good and collaborative science. Let me give you an example. Imagine you're driving from here to Maine, but the navigation app on your phone only updates every other day. And for each state that you travel through, you need a new app where different information derived from different satellites is presented in a totally different format. And there are multiple unseen hazards along your route. That's not far from what it's like to navigate a ship in the Arctic. The data that you get is days old, lacks the information that you need, and is entirely dependent upon which part of the Arctic you're in. As a result, most ships in the Arctic operate under the hope that they will avoid ice. They follow the same shipping routes that they followed for over 30 years. But the Arctic is changing more than anywhere else on Earth. Sea ice is not the same. Weather patterns are not the same. And sea ice and icebergs are moving in new and different locations. Meanwhile, the number of ships in the Arctic has more than doubled in the past decade. After the Titanic, we prioritized Arctic mapping and international collaboration. But that urgency quickly faded, and now we are decades behind where we need to be. Just 20 years ago, GPS signals were not publicly available. AI algorithms were in their infancy. As a grad student, I was lucky if I could get one satellite image a year of the glacier I was studying, and I had to pay $500 for it. Now, GPS is ubiquitous. For that same glacier, I can get an image every few hours for free, and AI tools have the capability of sifting through thousands of images to pull out pertinent information. It is an exciting time to be a climate scientist. But AI tools are not built for climate science, and their adaptation is clunky and inefficient. To find features in sea ice, we use AI tools built for biomedical imaging. And to track icebergs and fjords, we use tools built for surveillance. We need AI tools that are built for climate science. We need more people studying and talking about climate, and we need to work collaboratively with other Arctic nations to reduce emissions and build a resilient Arctic. Let's focus on using AI for good and prioritizing climate needs. The time is right. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Our next topic is Islands as Hotspots by Michael Weisberg, the Best W. Heymans President's Distinguished Professor of Philosophy. Michael is a philosopher of science and experienced academic leader. He's an expert on the climate needs of small island developing states. He currently serves as senior advisor to Jamaica's permanent representative to the United Nations and as an advisor to the Fiji and Palau negotiating teams at the annual climate summits. Michael was a leading voice in the development of the mosaic of solutions for addressing loss and damage due to the adverse impacts of climate change, which led to major breakthroughs on the topic at COP27 and COP28. He's director of the Galapagos Education and Research Alliance and was a contributing author to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 6th Assessment Report. Please welcome Michael.
Thank you, Simon. I'm on Fulhadu, a very small island in Ba Atoll in the Maldives. It's a meter above sea level. It's please imagine this with me. It's ringed with mangroves and palms next to the most beautiful, sparkling turquoise water that you can imagine. And so I was walking along the beach, and I came to where the mangroves ended and the sea began. And a local woman came up behind me and said quietly, "The beach used to be here." That one sentence has stayed with me, the shoreline retreating step by step, the map of a nation being redrawn by the sea. So islands like these are where the climate crisis feels the most real. Maybe I shouldn't say that at the moment. The Arctic's great too. They're losing Antarctica even better. Can we? They're losing land, fresh water, even whole ways of life, not in some distant future, but right now. And they're also, though, where some of the most powerful climate leadership comes from. The very idea of 1.5, the campaign for a global goal in adaptation, and the insistence that loss and damage needs to be addressed by the world all began and are still sustained by small island nations. They lead because they must. They have little power and little leverage, but they've learned to lead through moral clarity, through coalition building, through imagination, the very capabilities that the world is in greatest need of right now, today. And so there's a deeper lesson here. Vulnerability and agency are not opposites. The same exposure that makes islands fragile gives them a moral authority to redefine what global responsibility means. So when we think of islands as hotspots for climate change, let's really focus on the courage and the creativity that radiates from these extremely important and extraordinary places. Thank you.
I just have to say, Michael nailed it. That was perfect. All right. Our next speaker is Dorit Aviv, Assistant Professor of Architecture in the Weitzman School of Design. Dorit will speak about how she and her team harness the sun to keep us cool. Dorit directs the Thermal Architecture Lab, a cross-disciplinary laboratory at the intersection of thermodynamics, architecture, and material science. Collaborating with urban communities most affected by extreme heat, her research explores how architecture can mitigate heat stress without relying on air conditioning. Her passive and low-energy cooling prototypes have gained international recognition, including a Holcomb Award for Sustainable Design and Construction for an adaptive wind catcher with hydrogel membranes, and a Rambo Foundation grant supporting the first publicly accessible solar-powered open-air cooling shelter built in New York City in 2025. Please welcome Dorit.
Our cities are frying. Streets built of concrete and asphalt absorb the sun's energy and radiate it back at us, trapping heat in dense urban canyons. These urban heat islands are not just uncomfortable, they're deadly. The cumulative effect of solar radiation and the re-emission of heat from city surfaces is the strongest predictor of heat-related mortality outdoors. And it's not evenly distributed. The hottest neighborhoods are often those with decades of disinvestment, fewer trees, fewer parks, little refuge from the sun. Heat magnifies existing health inequalities. So how can we protect people from this growing hazard? Shade is the first step, but shade alone may not be enough under extreme heat conditions. Air conditioning cools air circulating in sealed boxes, consuming massive energy and relying on grids that often fail during the very heat waves we fear. We can't air condition our streets. There's a better way to cool ourselves. Instead of cooling the air, we can cool the surfaces around us using chilled water. Imagine bathtubs, benches, and shelters that draw heat directly from the human body. Combined with shade, these cooling surfaces can reduce heat stress by over 30 degrees Fahrenheit, while using 10 times less energy than conventional systems. They can run locally on just a few solar panels without any connection to the grid. In 2024, we tested this idea. A solar-powered open-air bathtub cooled by radiant panels and a chilled bench in one of Philadelphia's most heat-vulnerable neighborhoods. In 2025, we built the first publicly accessible solar-powered radiant cooling shelter in New York City. This is how we can harness the sun to keep us cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorit. I'm now pleased to introduce you to Stephen DeCina, the brand new executive director of Penn Climate, Penn's whole of campus effort to accelerate solutions to the climate crisis. Steve will offer a defense of hot air. For a young man, I'm going to call him that, Steve has had a varied and expansive career, which started as a middle school science teacher in Newark, New Jersey. Still, he says, the most impactful and important work he has ever done. He got a PhD in biogeochemistry at Boston University and just left his post in the US Department of State, where he negotiated environmental agreements at the G7, G20, and the United Nations to come here to Penn. He's deeply committed to building community, engaging and mentoring youth, spending as much time in nature as possible, and to being a dad to his 2-year-old. He recently acquired land in an old stone ruin in his family's ancestral town in Italy, which he hopes to rehabilitate using traditional skills and regenerative agriculture. Please welcome Steve.
I hope you'll permit me just to, before you start my 90 seconds, I had this whole thing. It was a takedown of social media. We were going to talk about communication because that's really important to Penn Climate. I was going to talk about my toddler, but I realized it didn't sound great when I started putting it together. So this morning at 9 o'clock, I rewrote my talk. Also, and that was the hot air, right? That was the communication. I'm not defending hot air, Michael. Also, Penn Climate needs a volunteer from 1 to 1:30 today. Come see me after. You get some swag. 1 to 2 volunteers, please. We need your help. Okay, so start me now. All right. So I have a friend, Emiliano, who has a vineyard in Lazio, outside of Rome in Italy. I actually, believe it or not, have 2 friends named Emiliano with vineyards in Lazio, but that's a story for another time. But so Emiliano, like winemakers all over the world, is struggling to combat climate change in his vineyard, vineyards are truly hotspots. He's harvesting his grapes almost a full 2 months earlier than his grandfather did, and warmer springs are leading to early bud break, which makes the vine susceptible to spring frost. They're losing entire crops sometimes that way. But Emiliano is not your typical winemaker. He and his partners, Arcangelo and Martina, created and founded their winery as a biodynamic winery. It's called Progetto Sette, and they had 2 goals in mind. 1, regenerate the land. 2, uplift their community. And of course, 3, make excellent wine. And so as biodynamic winemakers in the face of climate change, Progetto Sette employs countless nature-based solutions. I'll tell you about my favorite one by telling you about my favorite wine. So my new title of my talk is called 2 Words, because that's the name of the wine in Italian. Due parole, 2 words. And it's beautiful. It's a white wine, macerated on the skins. It's usually bottle aged before release. It tastes like love, flowers, mineral, spice. It is amazing. Why is it called Due Parole? Because after Emiliano took the vineyard over from his family, his uncle Mario called him every day and said, Emiliano, I have 2 parole for you. Taglia l'erba, which means cut the grass, cut the weeds. Why did he say this? Because it looked like a mess. But Emiliano does not cut the weeds in the grass. He leaves them in place. Why? They retain water. They provide plant biodiversity. They provide habitat for all sorts of creatures. And they make the vineyard healthy. They make the wine really excellent. So please think about this in your own homes, maybe around Penn too. Let's not taglia l'erba. Let's leave some of it, right, to provide some of those services. And I have 2 parole for Emiliano, which is thank you for making such good wine and not taglia l'erba. Grazie.
As a professor of language, I love to hear languages that other than English occasionally spoken. Thank you so much, Steve. Our next speaker is Jennifer Wilcox, Presidential Distinguished Professor of Chemical Engineering and Energy Policy. She will tell us about hotspots in carbon capture, building the full solution. Jen grew up in rural Maine, surrounded by forests and rivers. Today, she's a professor of chemical engineering and energy policy, still trying to protect what she loves about the natural world, this time with science and engineering. She runs the Clean Energy Conversions Lab, where students design ways to capture carbon and reuse or store it. She's also the former principal deputy at the U.S. Department of Energy and now chief scientist at Isometric, a company focused on trustworthy carbon removal. Her work is about turning big climate ideas into practical tools and helping the next generation see that decarbonization is a design challenge, not just a policy problem. Please welcome Jen.
Carbon capture prevents carbon dioxide emissions from smokestacks or removes them directly from the air. We can't reach net zero without it, especially for cement, steel, chemicals, where renewables alone can't do the job. But here's the hot spot. Carbon capture sits at the center of mistrust. Some fear it prolongs fossil fuels. Others hope renewables alone will solve the problem. Both fall short. Done poorly, carbon capture props up fossil fuels. Ignored, it leaves us without the tools to meet climate goals. Progress takes a portfolio, not a silver bullet. Renewables and carbon management, they go hand in hand. Wind, water, and solar power our clean future, while carbon capture and storage tackle what renewables can't yet reach. The fossil sector, with its infrastructure, its expertise, can help accelerate that transition by putting carbon back underground and reusing it in ways that replace fossil feedstocks. Scaling up takes decades, so we have to act now. Despite political shifts in the US, over 100 capture projects are still moving forward. Iceland locks carbon in basalt rocks. Kenya uses geothermal to power carbon capture from the air while expanding its electricity access. China combines CO2 and hydrogen to make sustainable aviation fuel. Each adapts to local resources, proving there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The real hotspot is this moment. Do we wait for a perfect solution, or do we build the portfolio we know that we need? If we choose collaboration across sectors, borders, and generations, carbon capture can help safeguard the climate and strengthen our shared future. Thank you.
Our final speaker is, thank you, Jen. Our final speaker is Robert Habeck, Distinguished Global Leader Fellow of Perry Worldhouse. Robert will tell us why we need climate action now. Robert was Vice Chancellor and Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection in Germany from 2021 to 2025. During his term in office, he faced a wide range of global and domestic crises, including the end of the pandemic and wars in Ukraine and Gaza. He was also the co-chair of the German Green Party. In September 2025, he vacated his seat in the Bundestag. Before entering politics, he and his wife, Andrea Paluch, were successful German literary authors of more than 10 books together, and have continued to publish jointly. He holds a PhD from Hamburg University in German literature and philosophy. They have 4 children and will soon become grandparents. Let me get personal for a moment. I'm a professor of German. You can imagine how I feel right now. In a course I teach on environmentalism in Germany, my students learn about the German Green Party and how at crucial moments they've stepped up in the national interest and in the interest of peace, human rights, and climate to do the right thing. Robert fits right into that mold. I also show them a video of Robert facing a hostile crowd in a German mining district. He's open, listens, and shows respect by speaking honestly and not avoiding the conflicts. He's a model of political leadership, and I still cannot believe that he's about to give a Penn 1.5-minute climate lecture. Welcome, Robert.
Well, I could listen for ages to this praise. Thank you very much for having me. And as you have heard, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a professor, I'm a politician or a former politician, and therefore I use my 1.5 minutes to try to wrap up the political debate. So what it's all about? We talk about degrees and global warming and climate change and climate action and climate protection. But from my experience, and I think everyone will understand it, the climate does not need any protection. It's not about the climate. What we're talking is not affecting the climate, and the climate is actually just the climate no matter how warm it is. Even a 4 degrees warmer climate is just the climate. So what are we doing and what are we talking about if we are not protecting the climate? And it's not about the climate. I think it's vice versa. It's about us. The climate doesn't care. The climate does not need us, but we need a climate that has the potential to live in as an open and free society, as human beings, as mankind. We need climate. So climate protection is not about protecting the climate, but protecting freedom. An open and free society. That's what it's all about. And maybe sometimes we do not make it clear enough. Freedom, and there's a mistake many politicians and sometimes many voters made, freedom is not living a life without any rules. And I would say even not a life living without any restrictions. This is sometimes only antisocial. So freedom is about deciding in your lifetime which rules should apply to your life, which limitations we freely want to follow. That's what freedom and a liberal democracy is all about. And it's exactly this opportunity, this ability to decide about the rules of your life in the future will not be there if we face a world beyond 1.52 degrees. That will be taken away from us. My whole point is we should not talk about climate protection only. We should talk about freedom protection. When we do climate action, we are protecting, and this time I'd like to say we are defending the freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. We now move into the Q&A phase. Certain things are going to happen on stage. As moderator, I will ask the first question momentarily. I think we should actually do these things, right? You guys are going to take this down. I want to call attention to the fact that we have a very full tent. This is lovely. You're beautiful. It's fabulous that you are here. You have shown, Penn, that you care. You are the resolve that will face climate change. And now I think we're at a point where we can start the Q&A. Okay, I'd like to ask the first question. Let's see, you guys can distribute these mics down that way. And when you go to speak, you have to turn your mic on. And when you're done, turn it off, okay? It's not a little question. Michael and now Robert too, I think they put a moral light on climate change and what it calls us to do with regard to freedom, with regard to showing courage. We learned that vulnerability can be combined with agency, can even be a platform for agency. Now, I don't have to tell you that universities and colleges in the US and elsewhere are under a kind of pressure that they haven't seen in a long time. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, those of you who'd like to address this question, on the role or roles and the responsibility or responsibilities of the university in a moment such as this. there's the question, who'd like to get us started?
You're going to make me answer this question?
You should not, don't have to go first, Michael, but you can.
It's my job. It's my job now, apparently, to answer this question.
Well, Simon, I'm really glad that you talked about the urgency and the moral framing, and of course, very inspiring, Robert, and to really think about the connection frame. I would just say universities have the same responsibilities that they have had since, this university is a combination of ideas of Benjamin Franklin and ideas of the German system, the Humboldt brothers. And, really we have these two responsibilities. One comes from the reason we have academic freedom is to try to tell the truth to the world. So we try to understand the way that the world is, to discover what it is. That's what it means to have a science in the German sense, and to actually try to, find our way to that. And then the other thing we have to do is respect one another and bring those along with us that find that difficult. So I think that's the responsibility of a university at this time and at any time. And I think these are our core values and we hold on to them.
I'm happy to add to that. I'll speak from the perspective of a teacher in the classroom. And I think that given the politics in the US right now, it's tricky. I'm teaching a course now on decarbonization. It's very interdisciplinary, and we have students coming from 5 of 12 schools in that class, all from different parts from law to engineering to applied sciences to business. And it's complicated. And so I like to support the students in coming to class and talking openly, asking questions, engaging in terms of what's the recent news that we're seeing in the newspapers, and trying to bring the relevance to the class and making sure that the class is a supportive environment for having those complicated discussions.
Thanks. One more perhaps, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Anyone else?
There you go. So I was hesitating as I'm a German, and maybe it's, I don't know, appropriate to talk about your situation here. So, but because I don't want to lecture you or give you some advice, but from the German experience and maybe the European experience, you can say that when politics interferes with science, in the end, it always destroys science. This is the lectures learned everywhere. It destroys the hardcore what science is about. Freedom and thinking about the impossible in a way. So there are, of course, universities in Russia, but actually Putin and in former Soviet Union, Stalin destroyed science in a hardcore sense. And remember the worst times in German history, where all the best of the German intellectual elite fled the country. It's not so bad, hopefully, in the US right now, actually. But when you think about this, in the end, all the universities, and I would say all the students, have to ask themselves, is this now an attack on the core of science itself? And then you have to stand up and defend science. Otherwise, this whole Penn campus doesn't have any meaning. Or is it just a coincidental thread that goes away, and tomorrow we're talking about soccer and basketball again? This I don't know, actually. I think nobody really knows. But from the European experience, whenever there's a meaning that science should be free, the Humboldt brothers exactly started with this point. And in the end, that's the question, $100,000 question that is beyond everything. Is this an interference that is really destroying the core, the idea of science itself? And this is a question I think nobody really can answer, and definitely I wouldn't now on this stage.
Let me put a little linguistic gloss on that. Wissenschaft, which is science, in German, they use Wissenschaft for every discipline. So there's literary Wissenschaft, and there's psychological Wissenschaft, and so on. So when Robert is talking about Wissenschaft or science, he doesn't just mean the natural sciences, but you mean across the disciplines. Okay. We're now opening it up for questions. And you can raise your hand, and then I will point to you, and someone will bring you a mic. They will hold the mic. You don't have to hold the mic. And then you can answer your question. So I saw this hand first, and then Trapita's back there. Okay, go ahead.
So I don't expect an immediate concrete answer, but maybe even just thoughts. But what do you see as existing and or potential ways to unify climate action? Because it's a very complex issue, and of course, there's different topics to approach. But I think often about this, ways to unify action, especially for lay people to feel competent in taking action.
Great. Steve, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah, so actually, I was thinking about this between this question and the previous question. Maybe I should have given my original talk, but still, I think a lot of it has to do with communication. I really do, and I had a line in my original talk that communication is as important or more so than adaptation mitigation. I think that is the issue. This attack on science is really an attack on truth, right? So it's anybody who's trying to tell the truth in moments where disinformation is a policy objective. And what's the antidote to that, right? It's speaking to people where they are about what they care about, and it is doing it with an open mind and an open heart, right? And so whether that is, as you mentioned, whether that's lay people, right? Whether it's my mom who tends to vote Republican, but getting her to understand and believe in the science behind climate change by speaking to things that she cares about, or whether it's, like we're trying to do at Penn Climate, is speaking to all these different schools, constituencies, centers, researchers, everything at Penn, and getting them to work together, right? So, but really, and I learned this as a negotiator, and I learned it as a 7th grade teacher, you have to talk to people where they are and talk to what they care about.
Thank you, Steve.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so I'm not sure. I love the framing of solidifying or unifying climate action. I kind of like what's on your shirt in the back. Simon, do you want to show the? Right, that's sort of a counter to like the idea of like unifying all action or solidifying it in some way. I think part of the problem with climate is because it's such multidimensional, multi-sectorial. It's paralyzing, right? If I need to think about like how we solve the climate crisis is super paralyzing, and so I think it's more. At least at our level, maybe at your level is a bit different, but maybe at our level, to move away from being paralyzed is finding the initiatives that you feel strongly about, right? And it could be local, Philadelphia. There's like, we heard research there. I'd work in Niger and in Uganda and in Liberia. And so I found that my niche, right? And so I like this, like finding the niche that you feel strongly about and work there rather than trying to find a way that will like unify all problems that are related to climate change.
Thank you, Guy, for that answer. Okay, Trapetus, yes.
Thank you all for speaking. I was really interested in the conversation about carbon capture. What do you think is slowing the technology down? Do you think it's the price of original investment? Do you think the technology is a little too expensive at this very moment? And two, in terms of storage, what does that look like under sea, under like ice, and under soil? And what would happen if those things fracture? Would it be released back into the air, almost like a Gulf? What's it called, like a Gulf Coast oil spill?
Sure. So in terms of the first question, it's not just the United States. So globally, there's actually, at this point, thousands of projects that are happening and moving carbon capture forward, mostly focused on industrial decarbonization. And then the second piece is thinking about taking carbon back out of the atmosphere, the accumulated CO2. And you hear companies like Microsoft, Google making investments in this space. And the reason that they're doing that, and it's voluntary, but the reason that they're doing it is because there's a net zero goal. And there are really difficult to avoid emissions from agriculture, for instance, and also long haul trucking and shipping and aviation. And we essentially can't just use renewables to displace those. And so Net zero means that we need to take carbon out of the atmosphere in order to counterbalance the emissions we can't avoid. And so corporations like Microsoft recognize that, and so they're voluntarily investing in carbon removal from the atmosphere. So that's happening, and these projects are globally moving forward. In terms of storage, when we capture the carbon, what do we do with it? In terms of scaling, where is the carbon mostly sourced? From combustion of fossil fuels. Where do fossil fuels come from? Rocks underground. It turns out that the same rocks that we got fossil fuels out of are those rocks that we can put carbon back into, and over time they'll mineralize and actually be stored permanently in the subsurface. Certain rocks, not like the ones we get oil and gas out of, like in Iceland and Kenya, are called mafics, like basalt, and you can actually mineralize the CO2 in less than 2 years. And so that's an approach that's being used, again, globally in different regions. But you can also take carbon as a chemical feedstock and make products out of it. Most of the things that we rely on, small scale compared to, say, energy, but plastics, anything, your clothing, this table that we're at, our chairs, anything that you can see that we use on a daily basis is made from fossil fuels. But we've got enough waste carbon that we can use the carbon as a feedstock and stop getting it out of the ground. It's just that the scale of utilization is tiny. It's not going to solve the climate problem, but it's going to slow down our need for pulling carbon out of the ground. And so those are two approaches: geologic storage ultimately, and then products with carbon as a feedstock.
Thank you, Jen. Let's take a question from this side. We've got David here and back there. So let's do David first.
Hi, thank you so much for all of you being here today. My question specifically was for Professor Weisberg. And so in the current international political climate, what are the main leverages that small island countries have in negotiating different climate adaptation strategies? Maybe kind of similar to what Professor Grossman was talking about in migrating and working with other countries' governments.
So if you literally mean, I'll answer it two parts. For reasons that are not entirely obvious, if you really take just like a pure game theoretic analysis, the islands have always punched above their weight, in part because lots of other countries actually are sympathetic to, and so I think having a kind of clear moral authority has allowed the islands to really make progress in a lot of areas, including, like I said, in having in the Paris Agreement part of the goal be, efforts towards 1.5. So I think, I wouldn't call that leverage exactly, but I think that they've sort of leveraged their voice, if you like. They've really shown a clear path, and them working with developed countries who have, progressive in the climate space. So, Germany right now, France, the US in the past, the UK, Australia, countries like that, that's helped them. If you mean literal leverage, the piece of leverage that they have is that especially the islands in the Pacific and to some extent the islands in the Indian Ocean do occupy very strategically important locations. So there's a lot of interest in both, if you think of two major players in traditional climate negotiations being both the United States and the People's Republic of China, both have a lot of interest in those same parts of the ocean that a lot of the small Pacific islands are in. So if you want to think in that kind of like real IR nuts and bolts leverage, that's probably where it comes from.
Thank you, Michael. There was a question back there. In the meantime, anyone on this side? Hands? One back there? Two? Okay.
Hi, everyone. Lovely talks. Great to hear. I was wondering if you could enact one specific law pertaining to climate change policy, either in the US or in Germany or in Italy or internationally, if you could actually enforce it. What would it be, and why would that be the first step?
Love those kinds of questions. Who wants to have a go? You get to enact a law.
Carbon price.
Go for it.
No. One.
One is, I guess not subsidizing oil and gas.
All right. Exactly. This is where you get to applaud. Okay, more great ideas, radical ideas. One law.
Radical.
I got one. I would reverse Citizens United and get that corporate money out of politics and the way it's been since then. That was a disaster.
Go for it, Guy.
I think many of us in my world will say carbon pricing, like actually putting like real carbon pricing in place.
Real carbon pricing. Anyone want to call out a law that they'd love to have? Go ahead. Do you have one in mind?
I like the Citizens United one. That's sort of the lot of problems, especially.
Yep. Okay, cool. You have a law?
The carbon fee and dividend that's proposed by the Citizens Climate Law.
Yeah.
It's related to a carbon price and recycles revenues back on a per capita basis to all Americans to help offset transition costs.
Right. Citizens Climate Lobby. Look them up if you're interested. Okay, let's see. There was a question here and then one back there. So let's go here. Who's got them? Oh, we'll start back there since you're there, Amber. Excuse me. Sorry.
Hi, I was wondering about your thoughts on the kind of divide between environmental progress and the economy, and if, as academics, you have thoughts on if we're going to be able to solve the climate crisis without it being profitable for someone.
Robert, sounds like a question for you.
Well, when I took on office in Germany in December 2021, that was like 10 months before Russia's full-scale invasion on Ukraine happened, and then a lot of trouble with our gas supply happened. I can talk about then 1.5 hours about this if you want me to do that. But this is like stories from the past. The idea was to do exactly what you have asked, transforming a very fossil-driven energy-intense industry sector in Germany to green production. And due, I think, to the crisis after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it is happening, but slower than expected in Germany and in Europe. But if you look at the world scale, I would say, and I don't know if you have better figures than me, it is happening now. So it's like the decision is made. So 80% of the investments in energy infrastructure and new energy of the past 10 years was going into renewables and depending techniques like storage grids, digitalization, and so on and so forth. So this is the future. And I mean, the US is a big country, so you might, if you are an American politician, come to the idea that self-reliance is a good thing and you produce in America for Americans only. But Europe and Germany and the rest of the world have to produce and act together with the world. We are 80 million Germans. If we produce only in Germany for Germans, we have a starving economy. So we are forced to produce the new stuff, the new techniques. And then it adds up to what you've asked. This is everything that relates to climate neutrality in production sites, in even in chemicals, in steel industry, and so forth. This is the future, and all developing countries will go this way. And the question is, are the developed countries with, or are they falling back? This is the German question, actually, and about the American economy, others have to do the talking.
Amber, are you saying one more question? Two more questions. Okay. Question. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more, just from a developing country's point of view, because developed countries will take care of themselves, as you say, Robert. So the IAEA estimates that it's going to cost about $1.3 trillion per year for developing countries to implement both the energy transition, but also all the adaptation measures that they need in order to actually, both keep the climate well below 2 degrees and also protect the most important ecosystems, infrastructure, everything else. $1.3 trillion is an enormous amount of money. I don't need to say that. And the climate funds that like the UN has set up have only ever had billions, maybe 20 total. So I don't, like my mother always says, I only know how to spend money, and I'm a philosophy professor, so but it's like, where is this money? It has to be, out in the real economy, not just in kind of government systems. And the Paris Agreement itself recognizes this. So Article 2.1c envisions that all financial flows in the world are going to have to flow in this climate direction. So whether we like it or not, that is what it has to be. So actually an invitation to all of you, especially those of you studying economics, business, things in the real economy, is we actually need to figure that out. So it's probably the hardest puzzle in the climate space that's not really been solved. How do you actually design a global financial system where the capital actually flows into the right direction? It's not that hard now, as Robert's saying, to imagine for developed countries. It's very hard to imagine it for lots of developing countries.
Thanks a lot, Michael, for that. One more question, and that's you right there.
Okay. My name is Shabanga. I'm from Nepal. That's where the Himalayas are, and we have an increased amount of floods and glacial melts and things like that. And it causes a lot of problems that trickle down into the economics of the country, causes migration problems and stuff like that. And recently, there's been a lot of like retraction of foreign aid, which like helps sustain our economy and navigate through a lot of these crises. So my question would be to, in context of directing the global economic, funds towards countries that need it most. How do we advocate for ourselves as a tiny country? Because a lot of these talks are dominated by America and Germany and countries like that. Where do we bring our voices and how to navigate through this? Just a general idea.
You're the expert. I can actually answer the question, but
We have 3 experts who could answer that question. They're trying to figure out who it's going to be.
it's the G20 that's going to solve this problem, isn't it?
The we have 4 experts. Go for it, Steve.
I don't think the G20 solves problems. I think maybe the UN. Yeah, that's not. It will not be the G20 that solves this problem. Especially not as it's currently configured. No, I'd like to pass back to Professor Weisberg.
Well, I mean it when I say that it's a substantial research question, and I think that there were attempts, like a very famous one was called GFANS. Maybe not very famous in my little tiny piece of the world. This was Janet Yellen and Mark Carney trying to create a way for private equity in particular to actually bring funds in the directions that they're needed. But like a country like Nepal. It's not even even just a loan is a hard thing, because accessing the interest that Nepal would have to pay on even like a concessional loan would shock people in the United States who might have be familiar with like a home loan or something. So if Nepal has to pay 15% interest on a loan to build an infrastructure project that's necessary for basic protection, it's a huge problem. So I don't pretend to have the answer, but I definitely think the UN and other kind of multilateral or minilateral organizations are ways to like concentrate ideas and to try to get coordination. Well, we need the ideas, and I literally mean this. This is like a substantive research topic that the University of Pennsylvania should actually be trying to solve. So talk to me afterwards. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. Okay, so before I ask you to thank the speakers, I want you all to take a good look at your speakers. Remember what they said. They're a fraction, actually, of the climate talent at the University of Pennsylvania. I could point to a lot of people. I just happened to see Arthur van Bentham there from the Wharton School, who also offers fantastic classes. And so there are great courses to be had. You can have an amazing climate change related education at the University of Pennsylvania. So check out the courses that these profs are teaching and go to the EII, Environmental Innovations Initiative webpage, where you can find an inventory of all of the climate classes that are taught at the University of Pennsylvania, so that you can speak knowledgeably about climate change and make good decisions as well. Okay, now please join me in thanking these amazing speakers. To see a replay of today's lectures or any other talk from our library of lectures, visit us on the Penn Arts and Sciences website or the Penn Arts and Sciences Vimeo library. Please consider attending another Climate Week event today or on Thursday or Friday. National Geographic photographer Jason Edwards, right there, is speaking this afternoon at Perry Worldhouse at 3:30. Sonia Carly. Oh, yesterday was her book launch, not today, yesterday. And the library is presenting the annual Sustainability Book Award this afternoon. You can attend that, I think, at 5 o'clock as well.